Spectre Vision Radio.
The reviews for my novel were, to put it mildly, ridiculing. Half-baked ideas, clunky prose, characters that weren't fully fleshed out. And worst of all, critics and readers said, was that all I'd done was offer up a pale imitation of what my wife had done so brilliantly throughout her illustrious writing career. While their criticisms of my novel may have been just, their reasoning for why it didn't work, and my motivations, are way off. So I'll explain. A few months after my wife died, I decided to downsize. We'd never had any children, and we'd been the kind of couple content on having only each other as friends, aside from a few casual acquaintances. I think my wife had had enough of people, and once she'd achieved a level of success that allowed her to skip the cycle of book tours and press interviews, she'd been more than happy to retreat into an existence many would consider boring, but one we found comfortable. Anyway, I started to get the impression that wandering around that enormous house was only compounding my loneliness. Besides, even though she'd always said that everything we had was ours, it was really hers. It was her money that had paid for everything. She was the hugely successful horror writer, a beloved mainstay of the genre, who'd seen her work adapted into movies and TV shows. Whereas I was the husband who'd kept his job teaching high school literature out of pride rather than necessity. So I found an apartment closer to town and took it, hoping it'd encourage me to get out there a little more and not just spend my days locked away pining for what once was. But the task of sorting through everything we'd amassed over the years still needed to be confronted. It was tough going, trying to categorize things, trying to decide which things I should take with me, which could go into storage, and which could be donated to Goodwill and shelters. When someone's gone, suddenly everything they ever owned seems swollen with meaning. But I did my best, until I stumbled across something that I couldn't explain. At the back of my wife's walk-in closet, I found a shoebox. A quick glance told me it was full of miscellaneous paperwork, the drudgery one collects by simply existing. But I decided to rifle through the contents anyway, thinking there might be some piece of paper in there that I'd need at some point or another. Something that was in her name, some number I didn't know to an account I'd invariably have to close. But as I pawed through it, I found something else. Something that stood out. It was a single handwritten note, black words scrawled in untidy, sharp handwriting on a small white piece of paper that looked like it had been torn from a notepad. Elaine, we're waiting for you at 42 Blue Rock Road. That's all it said, and it wasn't signed. I looked up the address online. It was a larger-than-average house on a typical upmarket-looking suburban road, about an hour's drive away. Elaine and I hadn't been the kind of couple to pry into one another's private affairs. If Elaine came home a couple of hours later than I was expecting, I wouldn't bat an eyelid. And if why she was late didn't come up naturally in conversation, I wouldn't ask. We trusted each other enough that none of those details mattered. Only now, I was starting to feel like maybe she'd taken advantage of that. I decided to head out there, to Blue Rock Road, feeling it was the only way I'd be able to quell the unrest I feared would otherwise gradually metastasize inside me. As I drove, I tried to run scenarios in my head, to plan for them. How would I deal with whoever answered the door at 42 Blue Rock Road? No matter how many times I played it out in my mind, I couldn't settle on anything that sounded even vaguely suitable. "Excuse me, my dead wife had a note in her closet saying people were waiting here for her. I was wondering if you could please explain that to me." It sounded kinda crazy, but it was the truth, so I decided that was exactly what I'd have to say. The house my GPS directed me to stood out as the most impressive in the neighborhood. Couple nice cars parked out front, neatly manicured greenery painting an inviting but unashamed picture of wealth. I took a deep breath, psyching myself up to go knock on the door. But just as I was about to get out of my car, a man came out of the house. He was probably about my age, but much better looking, beautiful even, and much better dressed, nicely groomed. He exuded the kind of confidence successful people do, those fluid movements that look easy and unencumbered by the weight of the world. I froze. What if Elaine really was having an affair? What if that was a note this man had slipped her? What if she'd kept it as a memento from the first time they'd met? That suddenly felt like it had to be it. Elaine had it all. She could have had anyone. The idea she'd been satisfied with me seemed laughable now, and I felt like a chump for having ever believed it. Yet if all that was true, then why did the note say, "We're waiting for you"? It didn't add up. I decided to bite the bullet. I forced myself to climb out of my car and approach the guy as he was heading for one of his pristinely clean, expensive vehicles. When he spotted me, I saw a flicker of recognition in his face, which quickly transformed into an expression I can only think of as curiosity. It might have been my paranoia coloring my judgment, but I felt like he knew exactly who I was, but hadn't expected to ever encounter me. I told him why I was there, about the note, and he nodded. "I wrote that note," he said. "Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Peter." I hadn't expected him to be so forthcoming. My throat and brain dried up simultaneously, and I struggled to find my way to a response. "What does that note mean?" I eventually managed to spit out, refusing to shake his outstretched hand. Peter paused, seemed to be thinking things through, like he was pondering how best to explain something to me. "Where do you think your wife's ideas came from?" he asked. As his strange, unexpected question sank in, I found myself bristling with rage. What was he implying? Did this man have the gall to claim he was Elaine's ghostwriter, after I'd seen her slaving over every sentence she'd ever written with my own two eyes? Peter seemed to read my mind. "Please, don't misunderstand me," he said. "I invite a select few people to receive my guidance, your wife being one of them." I stared back at him, none the wiser and not at all placated. "What I offer is an alternative form of accessing one's creativity," he added. "A different, more direct way of bringing forth ideas and getting them to gestate." He smiled and turned to stare back at his house for a moment. "In fact," he said, "I have many of your wife's unfinished works." There was something about the way he said it that meant I immediately knew he was telling the truth. I demanded he show them to me, but he refused. "That is a confidence I could never betray," he said. His stoic approach to me a man grieving his late wife, filled me with anger once more. Let's just say the rest of the encounter was unpleasant. I left there wishing I hadn't cracked open Pandora's box. But knowing I had to force it all the way, now I'd got a glimpse of what might be inside. If there really were unfinished works she had written, I had to have them. In the hours since the encounter with Peter at Blue Rock Road, I'd convinced myself that I had to have every conceivable inch of Elaine now she was gone. Had to possess any fragment of her existence on this earth that I could cling to. The fact that I could read words she'd written that I'd never read before would be like having a new experience of her, even though she was no longer with me. So I grabbed the hunting rifle I'd never used, the one Elaine had got me as a gift one Christmas, and made the drive back out to Blue Rock Road in the middle of the night. I didn't feel like I had a plan, but in retrospect I guess my thinking was to get the jump on him so fast that he wouldn't have time to call the cops before I was on him. From the tranquil, dark street, I scoped the place out and made an educated guess where the master bedroom was. I made quick work of smashing my way through the back door, ran up the stairs and burst into where I hoped Peter would be. And I got lucky. With the gun pointed at him, I told him to get my wife's unfinished works, and that after he'd given them to me, he'd never see me again. It's not that simple, Peter said. I inched closer, letting him know I wasn't in the mood for riddles, letting him know the gun wasn't just for show. I'll have to take you to them, Peter said. But I must warn you that because these works are unfinished, they are extremely volatile, potentially even dangerous. I figured he was stalling. I kept the gun pointed at him and told him to hurry up and take me already. He led me down into the basement, which consisted of a large rectangular room lined by heavy-looking metal doors, a dozen of them, all locked up tight by heavy-duty, sliding metal bars. These are the aborted ideas, the ones not yet ready, Peter said. I must insist you look no further. I can't be responsible for what happens to you if you do. What is this place? I asked, but Peter had fallen silent, staring ahead at the doors, no emotion betraying whatever was transpiring inside his mind. But even without an answer, I felt drawn to the doors, knew I had to open them. As I started to move towards one of them, Peter seized his chance and darted back towards the stairs. I fired, more because I was wired with nervous energy than because I wanted to hurt him. Luckily, I missed, and he sprinted up the stairs and out of sight. I didn't go after him. I was far more entranced by the idea of what might be behind those metal doors than I was worried about Peter calling the cops. Picking one at random, I slid the metal bar open and pulled the door towards me. Inside, I could see only black, so I shuffled forward, cautiously. My eyes adjusted, and I saw that there was in fact something in the darkness. A figure was slowly and silently lumbering towards me, getting clearer with each faltering step it took. And when it got close enough, as it lurched forward in an uneven stagger to narrow the gap between us, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was like a collection of burlap sacks had been stitched together, then stuffed with something to give the mass a vaguely human shape. It stood uneasily at about 6 feet tall. 2 messily carved holes for eyes, and a downward slanting grimace for a mouth. The sack man, I thought instinctively. It kept slouching towards me and started to make a sound that was something like retching. And each time it did, it would cough up handfuls of dead leaves. I couldn't tell if it wanted to hurt me or wanted my help, but I didn't dare stick around to find out. I scrambled out of there, pushed the door shut, and slid the metal bar to lock it. Back in the main room of the basement, I tried to catch my breath. I was terrified, but utterly fascinated. So again, I picked another door at random. I opened it and stepped into a space that looked like it must once have been a classroom. Only the place had been covered by what I first thought was graffiti. Walls, desks, chairs, books, even the floors and ceiling were all covered in black scribbles. But when I looked closer, I realized it was actually a never-ending stream of mathematical equations made in black marker. Suddenly, a woman appeared, burst into life out of thin air, now sitting at one of the desks. Her body was haloed by a strange yellow shimmer. I took a step closer and she snapped her head round to look at me. And when she did, I saw fires blazing within her empty eye sockets. She opened her mouth and appeared to be trying to speak, but all I saw and heard through her toothless orifice was the crackling of the flames inside her. A woman inhabited by an inferno. She stood up and I can't even bring myself to say what she did. But when she did that, my body kicked back into gear and I got out of there as fast as my legs would carry me. There was no sign of Peter when I made my way back through the house, out onto the street, and climbed back into my car. The cops hadn't shown up, and I deduced that he must never have called them. So I drove away. In the months that followed, I found myself consumed by intrusive thoughts of what I'd seen in those basement rooms at 42 Blue Rock Road. Slowly but surely, the compulsion to write took hold, like that was the only way I'd be able to figure out what I'd bore witness to. Gradually and painfully, those ramblings became the novel I was so mercilessly mocked for. Wanting to capitalize on both my wife's name and her death were the main accusations that were leveled at me. But all I was doing was trying to get those awful images out of my head. I thought I was following the trajectory of what was meant to happen, to birth those things into the world, as Elaine had done with her stories. But I guess I hadn't been the right vessel to begin with. The public mauling I endured didn't bother me. What bothered me was the notion that those things had come from inside Elaine. That she'd been the conduit for such nightmares to push through into our world. And I'd been none the wiser the entire time we'd been married. I thought I needed to know every piece of her. That would somehow make it harder for her ghost, the memory of her, to slip away from me forever. But I guess people are meant to have secrets.